It's always important to keep in mind the color mode, the color models that you're going to be using in Photoshop, whether it's RGB or CMYK or something different. But Photoshop does let you change your color mode as needed. So let's explore. So here's a quick chart, and it's not the end-all, but it's a good general guidelines. And when it comes to color mode, what we want to think about is if we're using something like web images or something for screen or a PowerPoint presentation, that you pretty much always want to use a color mode that's an RGB. That's red, green, blue. And it's going to give you a lot of colors, like over 16 million colors. That's plenty. But it's the colors that are related to the monitor. So what your monitor sees are the colors you see. And those represent 3 channels of colors. And the 8-bit means that it's going to have, each channel is going to have 256 shades of red or green or blue. So that's your 8-bit, and it has to do with your 2 to the power of 8 and some interesting math in there. Now when it comes to print, there's actually quite a few options, and it really depends on the output, but the traditional, the most common, is CMYK based. And if you think about your colors that you have on your ink printer, typically you have a cyan color, and then you buy a 3-pack that's yellow and blue and red, or really, oh, excuse me, let me rephrase that. You got a black color, and then you get your 3-pack that's a cyan, magenta, and yellow, or a blue, red, and yellow. So that's usually the colors that you're using for print, but there are some exceptions to that depending on the printing process. So some print shops will accept the RGB, and a lot of times when I'm printing to my printer at my house, I'll just use RGB on Photoshop, and my house machine, my desktop printer, is just going to convert it for me. If I'm taking it to a print shop, I might be using some spot colors like Pantone colors, Pantone matching system, that's with the PMS, or black and white, grayscale, maybe a duotone, and index colors from some other interesting effects. So those are all options that you can use in Photoshop. So let's take a closer look at this in Photoshop now. And when you have a file open, you can actually see what the file color mode is at the top. Over here on the title tab, it shows me the RGB/8 tells me that it's 8-bit. If I come over here to my channels, I can actually see the channels for the red, the green, and the blue. And here's my blue channel, or here's my green channel. And this is showing me exactly where those green colors are living on my document. And then I also have a channel to composite of all the colors put together. So it gives you an interesting layout here. And the fact that it's 8-bit is telling me that each set of colors has 256 colors total, an 8-bit. And that's the standard. If I go in here to image mode, I can also see that it's RGB and it's 8-bit, and I can even change it. Now I could change it to 16 or 32, but really that's what you would take this if you're starting with that. If you took an image in a camera that supports a 16-bit or 32, or maybe a camera that supports RAW, it might start with a higher amount. But for me to go from 8 to 16, I'm just using some interpolation that really wouldn't serve any purpose. So I'm just going to leave it at the 8. What I could do, though, is I could change it from RGB to CMYK if I needed to do this for the print shop purposes. And I just click on the CMYK. It tells me it's going to convert it. And this does have a profile that's assigned to it, so I'm getting a warning about that. But I'll go ahead and click on OK. Sometimes when you convert, there's no profile and you don't even see a shift, but I'm seeing a little bit of a color shift because of that profile that was stored on that image here. Now, if I want to go back to RGB, if I go back to image mode RGB, it's a little bit dangerous to go back to RGB this way. I'll show you here, because I didn't actually return to the original image. The color, when it shifted, it didn't go back, and so the optimal way of getting back to that color is to actually revert it or return to the original. So if I go back to reverting it, you can see it's a little bit brighter. And RGB colors tend to be brighter than CMYK. You tend to have neons and just colors that really pop out. Whereas if you use CMYK, you tend to have more muted colors. And also when you print stuff, it tends to be a little bluer or darker than how you're going to see it on the screen. It's just the nature of the color model. You can think sometimes of these modes like a box of crayons, And they have a lot of the same kind of crayons, but there are slightly different hues in each box. Now there's a color mode in here called lab color. And the lab color is actually allows you to go back and forth between RGB and CMYK. And a lot of times when you're working on colors, you work in this lab environment so that you're able to have both of the color models of the CMYK and RGB as you're working on the document. And it's just going to track it a little bit differently. But again, when I'm changing my colors, I want to do it in as few steps as possible. So I'm not just going to be switching around. I'm going to usually use the revert command and then pick the color mode that I want to use. Certain color modes will work better for certain filters that you're using and certain tools. And usually when I'm working on it, because my images usually come to me in RGB format, most digital cameras and scanners will put in the RGB. I leave it in RGB format. It's also because the monitor supports RGB, and that's what you're going to see. I'm going to leave it in RGB format. And I'm not going to change the color too much until I get near the end of the process and I'm outputting it. But you could, if you wanted to, you could update it to CMYK near the beginning of that process. Let's just look at one other color. Here's one for the boy, and we go to image, and we'll notice that he's RGB. We'll click on CMYK. This also had that warning because there is a profile that's associated with this color, and we'll click on OK. And there's a little bit of a color shifting it, just making it just so not quite as bright, not quite as intense. And again, we also have the options where it's 8-bit, and we can move it down to, let's say, a 16-bit. And you don't really see any difference, but I want you to notice the file size is changing. So there, let's go back in here too. And you can see how it really got a lot bigger when you're going from a 16-bit to an 8-bit because it's supporting not just twice as many colors, but an exponential amount of colors in there. Now, when you're working with colors, you can also use the Camera Raw feature. And if you open up a file in Camera Raw, it allows you to work with the colors. And this is handy because a lot of times these pictures that you're taking or that you're acquiring are shot in a RAW environment, and RAW means that it's not associated with an RGB or a CMYK, but rather it's retaining all this color information that allows you to shift the colors independent of a box of crayons of a particular mode. So it just gives you more variety working with it, and then you can make your changes to the color corrections here. And then when it comes time to save the file, let's go ahead and cancel this out. When it comes time to save the file, then you can pick the correct color mode that you want for that particular need. But the reason why it's so important to be aware of your color mode, especially for print and for web, is because the color mode can affect the file size. The fewer colors you have, the smaller the file is going to be, which is definitely helpful for web and screen. It'll affect the quality of the image, and it will also affect some of the features like filters and other tools of what can be done based on if it's an RGB or a CMYK or some other type of color mode. Now we're going to do a pop quiz. Which color mode is optimal for web images? A, hexadecimal, B, RGB, C, CMYK, D, lab. The answer is B, RGB. Well, now you've seen the importance of working with color and choosing the right color mode for your images, and also how you can switch that in your image menu, image to mode.